Protein and carbs inherently digest in opposite environments, okay? Fat is the macro that kind of digests with everything, but protein and carbs do not. They digest in inherently opposite environments when we're talking on the pH scale. So we have the acidic environment of protein and the alkaline environment of carb. And mixing them together, you now have, something isn't being digested completely. Now it's going to ferment in your stomach, which basically means that it's going to rot in your digestive tract. But even from the people who like the classic bodybuilding stuff I talk about, Vince Gironda has referenced that for decades. He basically said protein and carb are not compatible. Protein is what builds muscle, and carb is what builds fat, is what he said. Realistically, carb builds glycogen, and then after you fill up, it builds fat. But carbs do not build muscle, so don't get that twisted. A lot of people like to mix protein and carb because of this. So I'm getting into the reason why now. Why do people do this in the first place? A lot of people do this because they think, okay, I'm bulking. I need a shitload of rice, and I need a shitload of pasta, and I need to have my protein at the same time, my chicken. What you have is you now have this clash of digestive environments, which we know is not going to work. And after that, it's going to hinder the absorption of one or the other. And the reason why this would never happen in the first place is because in nature, we would never have a time where protein is never naturally packaged with carb. Take a moment to think about that. But fat naturally comes with protein. We have cheese, steak, right? Fatty meats, fish. Fat and protein are very conducive with one another. And you never see, any sort of discussion of protein naturally occurring with carbohydrates. Why is that? Because they were never meant to be digested in the same environment. They do not work. Hey there, my name is Anthony Romano, and the title of this video is Never Mix Protein with Carbs. Okay, so this is one of the most frustrating things and one of the most frustrating, dogmatic myths that I try to break for people, because it's something that we all were taught is true, but it really is far from that. Okay, so I'm going to explain in the video why you want to avoid doing this, but overall, it doesn't mean you have to do a lot of the ketogenic stuff I like promoting and doing myself, because I've been doing it for 8 years, but it simply means if you're going to have your protein, don't have it with carbs. Okay, keep it separate. They do not work together. Okay. So, why is it that protein and carbs should not be eaten together? Okay, so I'm going to start off by saying, first of all, carbs are not necessarily bad. Okay, fat is not inherently bad. Protein is not inherently good, right? These things are, just look at these things for what they are. Protein is protein, carb is carb, fat is fat. There's different amino acids, different types of protein, some that are complete, some that aren't. There's different types of carbs, some that are going to spike your blood sugar more, some that are more problematic, less problematic. Just the point is, whatever kind of carb you're having, whatever kind of protein you're having, do not mix them. The essential reason is this: protein digests in an acidic environment. Carbs digest in a more alkaline environment. And I felt like making this video because I've been talking about this topic a little bit more frequently in some of my other videos, and people are completely baffled by it. They were unaware that this was a thing. Protein and carbs inherently digest in opposite environments, okay? Fat is the macro that kind of digests with everything. For the most part, fatty foods will just work with anything. They'll complement the digestion of protein. They're naturally occurring in many protein sources like red meats, and plenty of carbs digest well with just fat as well. Even though that will raise your triglycerides, depending on the food, that could be problematic or not. And it could also raise inflammation and problems like that. But the point is, digestively, fat works with everything, but protein and carbs do not. They digest in inherently opposite environments when we're talking on the pH scale. So we have the acidic environment of protein and the alkaline environment of carb. So when you start eating protein, your stomach will start to release, first of all, more hydrochloric acid to actually break down the protein with acid, and also enzymes that are more conducive to breaking down protein. Most of the digestion is actually going to occur from the presence of acid. That's what's going to break down protein more often than, the actual enzymes at play. But if you even look up videos, protein digests almost in 20 minutes completely by simply dumping hydrochloric acid on it, which is our stomach acid. Carbs do not, and they have to be digested using some of these other enzymes. So when you mix these together, here's what happens in your gut. Basically, you have whatever food you ate first is the initial environment of your gut, and mixing them together, you now have, something isn't being digested completely, whether it was the protein or the carb, right? First of all, you'd hope that it would be the carb, but even then you're kind of short selling yourself on your energy source. But the protein not digesting fully is going to be causing a reduction in amino acids in your blood. So that's a problem as well. If you mix these and something doesn't digest perfectly, now it's going to ferment in your stomach, which basically means that it's going to rot in your digestive tract, which is when it then ferments and causes these short chain fatty acids and gases to be created. So those gases created are what actually cause people to fart, and because it has incomplete digestion of these foods, because they have fermented and they've simply rotted instead of being digested and broken down. Protein is not meant to pass through our stomach like fiber. It is meant to be broken down. And naturally, in nature, there would never be a time where people would be having huge amounts of, like if you think thousands of years ago, right? There's an evolutionary purpose for this, because when people would get their protein, it would be from hunting something. And when they hunted an animal and had its protein, they would eat it, and they wouldn't be, harvesting a bunch of grains and making their pasta with it at the same time. As much as I'm Italian, I like my pasta, and I like it with meat sauce and stuff, right? Essentially, when you have, funny enough, it's naturally made with an acidic sauce on there. It's so, there's a lot of other things that we naturally are inclined to do to kind of counterbalance things. But that's more of a, wishy-washy cultural argument. But when we're talking about the actual digestion of protein and it being hindered by being mixed with carbs, it's because you have essentially an environment where not only is this going to cause you stomach and digestive stress, right, it is going to lead to ineffective digestion and absorption. So there's also a saying that a lot of people with, there's plenty of evidence on people who avoid mixing these, macro groups or doing sort of low carb approaches, their digestive system is less taxed because it doesn't have to try to mix digesting these foods that are inherently incompatible. And there's a phrase that if you take care of your gut for your first 50 years, it will take care of you for the next 50 years. And one of the best ways to do that is by avoiding mixing protein and carb. They simply are not compatible that way, and this has been known for a long time. I'll get back to the evolutionary example in a moment, but even from the people who like the classic bodybuilding stuff I talk about, Vince Gironda has referenced that for decades, that, well, up until his passing, of course, he basically said protein and carb are not compatible. Protein's what builds muscle, and carb is what builds fat, is what he said. Realistically, carb builds glycogen, and then after you fill up, it builds fat. But carbs do not build muscle, so don't get that twisted. A lot of people like to mix protein and carb because of this. So I'm getting into the reason why now. Why do people do this in the first place? A lot of people do this because they think, okay, I'm bulking. I need a shitload of rice, and I need a shitload of pasta, and I need to have my protein at the same time, my chicken, which by the way doesn't go with pasta from the Italian in me, but basically, if you have a load of lean protein and a load of pasta, what you have is you now have this clash of digestive environments, which we know is not going to work. And after that, it's going to hinder the absorption of one or the other. And the reason why this would never happen in the first place is because in nature, we would never have a time where protein is never naturally packaged with carb. Take a moment to think about that. Fat is naturally packaged with carb, right? Steak, cheese, fat is naturally packaged with protein, but it also is naturally packaged with carb. But fat naturally comes with protein. We have cheese, steak, right? Fatty meats, fish. Fat and protein are very conducive with one another. And you never see, any sort of discussion of protein naturally occurring with carbohydrates. Why is that? Because they were never meant to be digested in the same environment. They do not work. It's like, I don't need to beat that point anymore, but I was about to. Now, there's another video I made called the lean protein lie, and essentially it's where I talk about how, you know, protein is kind of not necessarily meant to be digested with fat, but protein in just spiking it in excess without having any fat is going to lead to lower bioavailability of the protein, because protein needs fat to be digested in your liver and converted into amino acids. So without that actual energy for your liver, right, which would be fat, you are not going to be able to use the protein you have, and it's simply going to be inflammatory. So a lot of these bodybuilder approaches, because I'm trying to really just narrow down and nail down the problems with the bodybuilding of today's age, goes with so many things that are just incompatible physiologically. They believe the dogma of just more protein, shitloads of protein. I've seen even videos of big name YouTubers doing, oh yeah, my 300 gram a day protein diet. And it's like, dude, like, and then they only have like less than 50 grams of fat. It's like, you were going to be taxing your body, okay? And they're also mixing it with carb at the same time. So their body's not going to absorb all that protein and carb, and they're going to have, you know, loads of digestive stress and gas. It's just going to be a mess. And that's why I very vehemently recommend you avoid the stereotypical modern bodybuilding diet. And also because of the chicken and rice. What's the chicken and rice that we have today? The fad of, well, not really fad, but the, you know, movement of just everybody thinking, yeah, I got my chicken and rice, and they have carb, protein, same meal, not going to get digested properly. And you also have this problem because they naturally do not occur together. It's not going to be a sufficient energy source to even digest that protein. That is why lean protein is essentially a problem, because people seeking these very high amounts of protein need to have the fats to digest them. So of course this is conducive to ketogenic dieting, which I love, and I've been, you know, making plenty of videos on, but doesn't mean you have to do it. It simply means take the principles from what our natural diet would entail, which is protein is never packaged with carbohydrate, and it often is packaged with fat. We need fat to digest the protein, and if you consume the protein on its own with the carb, it will lead to lower absorption of both. Okay, so hopefully those points were hammered home here. And besides the fact that, you know, you'll be causing digestive stress for your stomach, and this could lead to other problems and, you know, colon issues, and you don't really want those problems. And also mixing protein and carb, and especially fat as well, in cooking it leads to AGEs, which are advanced glycation end products. So cooking these things in one thing together is also something we're not meant to do, because they glycate in your body and they lead to these advanced glycation end product. So essentially, there are plenty of reasons scientifically that I'm using to explain to you why we are not meant to digest protein and carb in the same meal. They simply are incompatible. We've known this for a long time. Classic bodybuilding gurus like Vince Gironda have written about them. And in nature and with logic, we see that protein and carb are not the most compatible macro combination. So if you are going to have them in different meals. There you go. Complicated video summarized.
But wait! There's more! Hang on to your seat, baby! Cause this one's a screamer!
And also, even if you do mix carbs and protein in the same meal, I highly recommend that you use a digestive enzyme, okay? Because for a lot of people, especially the people doing one meal a day, this is absolutely imperative. You need to have, you know, the enzymes required to break down both of the food groups you're eating. And especially for me, when I have any protein dense meal, I always have this. When I have any meal that mixes macros, I have this. Inevitably, you're gonna have a burger in your life. Inevitably, you're gonna have a sandwich, okay? Any meal that mixes carbs and protein, especially in high amounts, like, you know, a huge amount of pasta, and I'm at a restaurant, I'm treating myself, yeah, I absolutely have digestive enzymes. And I have links in the description to this high-end one from GNC, and also to one called MASSZYMES, which are from a guy called Wade Lightheart, who just has a freaking superhero-like name. And essentially this guy is a huge catalyst for, you know, using these high protein enzymes to break down protein and maximize that bioavailability when you're eating. And it actually has more of the other enzymes required for starches and simple sugars in there as well. So I highly recommend you go down to the description and pick up either MASSZYMES or, you know, these GNC ones. But realistically, the MASSZYMES one are the Ferrari here. Okay, so you should also mix an enzyme into there as well. Anytime you're combining these inevitably from social purposes or whatever, throw in an enzyme, it's necessary. And anytime you're having a high protein meal, you can further maximize it by having an enzyme, especially one with protease in so many different forms. So I have other videos on this, one called how to maximize your protein absorption 10 times, because that's what you can do with a high quality enzyme. But as far as maximizing your digestion overall as a whole, that is going to play out very well for you in a bodybuilding and fitness context, and I recommend picking up some enzymes. Have your rice and then have your chicken later, but then decide to have a fattier source of meat than chicken, or have some fish or something if you're a vegetarian, right? So there you go. That's it for the video. Anthony Romano. Go follow my Instagram, subscribe to my YouTube, like this video, and go to my website if you want to work together one-on-one. I can help you with consultations where, you know, we're taking our time together. I'm not just rushing out everything because I want you to click the 11-minute video. Alrighty. Thank you very much. Peace.